on justice. I am Tawheed moderating this session. Exceptionally, we have 4 scholars who will share their research or work with us. Each presenter will have 15 minutes to share their work, followed by a question and answer session at the end. Let's begin with the first presenter, Victor Ivan. He'll be discussing his work on creating an international system for preventing the next genocide. So I welcome Victor to start.
Thank you, Tawheed, and good morning, everyone. All right, can everybody see this PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So, like he said, my name is Victor, Ivan, or Ivan, which I'm fine with either. And I wrote a while ago a paper proposing an international legal system for preventing the next genocide. The reason I came up with this this idea was that I feel like the current international system is a bit too slow and is purely reactive, which means that unfortunately, sometimes we can't address the genocide or stop it until a lot of damage has already happened, or in the worst case, not address it at all, or as the mechanisms themselves tend to get clogged up. So I've put forward this system, and in order to get into the depths of the system, I'm going to go over first a 4-stage model for genocide I've outlined that I think is crucial for the legal system itself, and then I'll describe the system. So a 4-stage model is essentially a stage model of an origin and overall progression and aftermath of a genocide. It's I feel like you could apply it about any other genocide, and I'm just going to be using for an example just to outline the stages themselves. The Rwandan genocide. So the first stage is going to be the origins. The origin stage is essentially we need an ideological origin for the genocidaires, or people who are about to commit genocide, in order to go forward with the eventual act, because it is a horrible act. Like, there's no way you can stretch the truth around it. It's horrible, and it's something that the average human being would struggle to, well, justify in their head. So we need a strong ideological origin. We need like the idea that this is going to be the lesser of 2 evils and it has to be done. In the Rwandan genocide, the origins, to oversimplify it, they come from the when the Rwanda was controlled by Belgium, and they instituted this racial caste system that had never existed before, which created class divide and created a great social economic inequality, along with a greater fear that the other group will try to overcome the other. So when Rwanda gained its independence, it was a constant struggle back and forth between these 2 main groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis, for power. The cartoon that you see here, for example, is a cartoon of Paul Kagame, the current president of Rwanda, and his rebels walking over the supposed bodies of dead Hutus. This was part when Paul Kagame was, fighting with the rebel Tutsi forces against the then in power Hutu government. And as a result, the fear here led to the eventual genocide on the basis that if they gain power, they're just going to continue doing worse things to us, and it's better that we are in power and that we deal with them than allow us to pass. So once we have our ideological justification, of course, we're going to need to actually do the preparation itself. Now, genocide is an organizational act. So you need to have enough people to coordinate together and do this effectively. You can't just run in and do it spur of the moment. I mean, not that there aren't acts of it. It's just more as a whole, it is an organized act. You need to get groups together. You need to give them targets. You need to give them weapons. You need to give them resources, and timetables. And that's what happened to the Rwandan genocide. A lot of these Hutu paramilitaries, like the Interahamwe, were organized in various chapters, placed in certain areas, told when to strike, and they were armed with machetes due to their own cheapness. And this allowed them to strike effectively when the genocide began and kill hundreds of thousands of people. Now, on top of the simple organizations and arming the eventual genocidaires, another part of the actual preparation is that you need to be able to weaken the target group itself. You need to strip it of its social, any social advantages it may have or privileges, any political, economic ones it may have, separated from other parts of society, and overall just essentially disarm it from it and prevent it from being able to mount an effective resistance. In Rwanda, this was true during the in the lead up to the genocide, where a lot of Tutsi were stripped from power, were prevented from being able to work in certain economic professions or hold political offices, had different legal protections. And as shown here, they had to, all Rwandans had to carry an ID card that either identified them as Hutu or Tutsi, which meant that when the genocide happened, an easy way to identify somebody as belonging to one group or another was to simply ask for their ID card. If you can't weaken the group, then as a genocidaire, you have a problem because you can't really have much of an effective genocide without a weak target. So once all the preparations are going forward, we have the actual act itself. I'm not going to belabor the point as to what genocide is. I think we've already had a day and most of us are pretty familiar with the definition. But one thing I wanted to note, because I think it is crucial when it comes to the preparation and later discussion for the system I'm about to propose, is aside from just simple destruction, I see genocide as a way of ensuring a group can't reproduce. Like, it's not just biological offspring, but just members of the group. For example, murder does that, but so when you commit sexual assault, you're also ensuring either one, that you as a genocidaire are having a new member of your group be born to that assault victim, or you're causing damage to ensure that that person can't bear any more children for the group. And speaking of children, of course, if you take the children from the group and raise them as your own, you're depriving the group of being able to continue on and thus theoretically reproduce. In the aftermath, of course, we have the aspects of denial, where the genocidaires usually will try to cover up or at least excuse away their the reasons why they did something, and at the same time there'll be grave consequences for society. We don't have to really debate the point as to whether genocide is amoral. It's very immoral, but I think a key point to sometimes stress is the damage it can do to society, the way it can destroy key social foundations and overall just disrupt what had once been a stable a stable society and transform it in ways that who knows what will happen in the future. So the model I'm proposing is I will call a whistleblower model. So way I've seen in my research is that the only way a genocide's ever been stopped is through use of force. Rwandan genocide only stopped because that government was overthrown and kicked out of power, and thus stopped from being able to continue the genocide. As a result, it's harder to implement the tools to prevent or stop genocide because states are usually very reluctant to use force. So this model here, it's supposed to, use non-force mechanisms for these purposes. And its goals are to prevent genocide, or in the alternative, accelerate the response mechanisms to it, like the investigations, the various UN meetings, and so on and so forth. It focuses more on individual over state responsibility, because I believe that if you focused on state responsibility, you'd have a harder time passing this or getting accepted. And one thing I wanted to put forward is the basis of it would be a creation of a new custom that I'd like to call responsibility to warn, where the idea is that you as an individual within a state entity have a responsibility to warn the international community of an incoming atrocity crime like genocide. So the first step of this model is essentially there's an individual within a state entity that realizes that state entity is in the middle of a stage 2. The reason I say a state entity is we want to give the benefit of the doubt that not the entire state is in it, even though in most cases it is going to be the entire state. So that individual usually has to be somebody that can see like the bigger picture, somebody in a managerial role or executive role, or has a special function in the state, in the entity itself. that individual ends up writing a complaint in as much detail as possible, where they identify all these warning signs they see, the mechanisms that might be at play, who could be responsible, and who this person and who the individual is, along with their role in the state entity. And this complaint is sent to the ICC. So then we have our second stage where, it's the response to it. The ICC receives the complaint and they have to evaluate it. But they're not going to publish the fact that they've received the complaint just yet. They want to see that if there's any potential credibility to this, considering the individual's role, the state and the state entity itself, the allegations at hand. And if they deem it uncredible, then they're going to notify the whistleblower their assessment and not continue any further. This process ends here. Yet, if otherwise, we'd proceed to the next step. Additionally, while during this step, we want to give the benefit of the doubt. We would say that if it's just the state entity, the complainant would inform a relevant national authority who could then promptly act and correct the current proceedings towards a genocide. However, I had that this is reasonably possible, because in all likelihood, if this were to happen, they would not be safe. It would either endanger this complainant, or it would endanger this whole process, and it wouldn't be feasible for them to do it. Yet we add this in for the benefit of the doubt. So, if the ICC deems that this complaint has any credibility, it publishes it. And the idea here is to notify the world and put it on alert that this is what's happening. There's a good chance that this might be going on, and everybody's on high notice. So of course, then we go to the next step, which would be like the subpoenas and the proceedings that would follow with the ICC, where the ICC would subpoena the relevant parties, specifically the ones that would be named in the complaint, and institute proceedings where they would try to determine the full credibility allegations and whether they hold merit. If the relevant parties don't show up to the proceedings, or the state doesn't respond appropriately enough, it'll be taken as a true affirmation of the complaint and the veracity of its details. Lastly, we have quickly the conclusions of the proceedings themselves. If there's insufficient credibility, process ends here, and the ICC is going to publish that. But if it's evaluated to have full credibility, whether the individuals didn't show up, the state didn't respond, or the proceedings find that there's credibility here, the ICC is going to publish these findings, and then it's going to recommend that the state, take the actions it can to stop this process, while also recommending relevant UN bodies to sanction the entity and begin the process needed for investigations. And from here on out, it's up to the international community. The idea here, using public pressure to push forward a response, because it's one thing to be frustrated or annoyed at your government for not being able to respond to an ongoing atrocity. It's another, but it's definitely a lot more infuriating and powerful if you see your government knowingly and openly recognize that a disaster is about to happen and they do nothing. So the idea is to use public pressure to accelerate it. One thing I want to say is that if these subpoena proceedings did end up, like let's say the individual summoned did come to the proceedings, there aren't any arrests. We can't effect arrests without any crime. The idea here is just more of like a warning system and something to accelerate the whole process. So, is it feasible? I believe it's feasible because of the focus on the individual level and on the idea of using non-force. Those are the main critiques. Those are the main selling points, I believe, for the system. Plus, it encourages various states to follow international law, engage in the international process, and put more faith in international process. Yeah, the whole idea here is for genocide, not only we're trying to prevent an amoral act, but we're trying to ensure overall stability in the world. So will it prevent genocide? Well, the ideal goal is yes, it will, but pragmatically, if this were to be put in practice, it wouldn't. Yet, I believe that the ability to be able to just, speed up the clock on the response to what's about to be an incipient genocide, and the investigations, the sanctions, maybe even potential forceful intervention, is worth the ability here that we have with the system. So that, I believe, it has enough power on its own. Another applicability is if we could potentially even extend this system to other organized atrocity crimes through this whole process. So that's essentially my presentation, my paper and I'm looking forward to answering any questions you may have about this, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor, for your insightful presentation. To the audience, please, whatever questions you have in your mind, share that. We have our question and answer session at the end. So our next presenter is Mr. Jack Sigman, who will present his paper titled Credible or Political, the Modern Day Genocide Accusation. Yep. Floor is yours.
Thank you. By way of caveat, this presentation does not deal with what actions individual countries, the international community, the UN, the ICC, nor the ICJ should take. This is strictly a primer for the classroom in leading a discussion as to whether a genocide accusation has enough merit to investigate as a class project or an individual student's capstone thesis or dissertation. The main issues to consider when discussing a genocide accusation is the credibility of the accuser, the intent of the accusation, and I'm going to defer to Dirk Moses here. Quote, "This is a practice I call the diplomacy of genocide, the mobilization of humanitarian claims against geopolitical rivals. That doesn't mean that the claims are wrong. All these empires are engaging in various exploitive and violent practices. The mobilization of these delegitimization strategies is nonetheless a diplomatic game." And Hugo Gratius, the modern day father of international relations, said just about the same thing in far too many words back in the 1600s. Back to me, whether the intent of the accusation rises to the level of a credible threat, and if the action taken does truly resemble genocide, wherein the civilians are being killed because of who or what they are, rather than where they are in relation to where the enemy is fighting. Since the coining of the word genocide by Lemkin, the world has struggled to understand what constitutes the destruction of a people. Because of this, the UN spent 2 years debating the acts that contribute to the destruction. The beginning of the 2-year process started with the initial UN definition of genocide in Resolution 96I of 1946. Genocide is a denial of the right of existence of entire human groups, as homicide is a denial of the right to live as human beings. It shocks the conscience of humankind. With this definition, it becomes easy to persuade the public that one who commits genocide must be among the worst human beings on earth. Some would assert that this declaration is followed by the conclusion that a state that commits such an act must be pure evil and deserves to be destroyed. It is this persuasive definition that causes or should cause humans to have an interest in preventing and stopping genocide, as well as punishing the perpetrators. Of the 5 acts listed, done with the intent to destroy the group, in whole or in part, one act is obvious and the other is ambiguous. The obvious one that easily gets our attention is killing members of the group. The rest are ambiguous, but the ambiguity starts even before we get into the actions. It starts with the preamble, intent to destroy, and in part. The credible accusation of genocide starts when there is evidence of an intent to commit one or more of the 5 acts, with the expected result being the destruction of the group. You can't take a single line out of a speech which seems to prove intent When the entire paragraph is read, it may show that the one line was not referring to all, but referred solely to those who committed a crime against humanity or a war crime. Additionally, the timing of the statement, the identity of the recipients, the reason for the supposed genocidal threat are important. It is clear that the intent of the perpetrators of the Ottoman genocide against the Armenians, Cambodian genocide against the River Vietnamese, and the Myanmar genocide of the Rohingya was ethnic cleansing of an unwanted minority and was to be accomplished with a total disregard for the lives of the victims. It did not matter if they lived or died, only that they were gone. The intent to destroy would seem to mean the physical destruction of the group. However, the 4 remaining acts do not appear to be that destructive. Therefore, without engaging in a massive massacre, it is hard to determine why the other actions are included, thus interfering with the thought that an accusation of genocide can be credible without the evidence of massive loss of life, no matter who makes the accusation. In part is also an ambiguous term that many of the states that adopted the framework of the Genocide Convention added a modifier, substantial, even though the modifier itself does not totally erase the ambiguity. And the United States is one of those states that did so. How many is in part? Quigley states in his introduction to that specific chapter dealing with the phrase in part has eluded precise application. He believes that it imports a minimum numerical requirement. Unfortunately, he doesn't tell us what that minimum is. Looking into the discussions held between 1946 and 1948, the UN Ad Hoc Committee, which had 24 sessions to discuss and write the initial draft, included the term in part because, and I quote, some participants worried that persons accused of genocide might argue that they did not intend to destroy the entire group, just a portion of it. When taken up by the drafters of the Rome Statute, they considered in part to be understood to refer to the specific intention to destroy more than a small number of individuals who are members of the group. But although some delegations to the Preparatory Committee requested clarification for the term in part, none was ever provided. Even Lemkin indicated that in part meant a substantial part. 2 years after Axis rule in occupied Europe was published, Lemkin wrote that there has been no serious endeavor hitherto to prevent and punish the murder and destruction of millions. It appears then that when Lemkin's statement is combined with his 1944 definition, genocide entails the murder of a significant number of individuals, primarily because of their birth group. Between the time genocide came into being, the word genocide came into being, to when the Genocide Convention was finally come into force in 1951, it became a political weapon. The first accusation, once it became in force, was launched by a group of Black American civil rights organization, the Civil Rights Congress, which accused the United States of willful creation of conditions making for premature death, poverty, and disease. While it is certainly true there was systematic and deliberate racism in the United States that created conditions wherein minority groups such as Black and Latinos had their population experience lower age expectation, higher rates of infant death, higher rates of poverty. That wasn't the purpose of any such legislation. It was just plain racism and not genocide. If an accusation comes from one of the various people's tribunals, it's likely political in nature and not credible. In fact, the first People's Tribunal in 1967, which accused the U.S. of war crimes in Vietnam a very young international lawyer by the name of Richard Falk declared it's a judicial farce. However, up into the 2000s, tribunals against Israel started. That same Richard Falk was one of the judges. And he stated it should be acknowledged that this undertaking was never intended to be a neutral inquiry without some predispositions. The the Malaysian organization took up the tribunal because they were upset that the ICC was not persecuting crimes outside of Africa. And they were upset that Israel was not on the docket. Regardless, there are legitimate courts wherein if an accusation reaches their lofty chambers, the issue of credibility is almost a certainty. This is not to say it will be found that genocide occurred or is occurring, nor that it will occur, just that there is enough perceived evidence to warrant an investigation. The source of the accusation is also an issue of credibility. If it's a dictatorship, especially one attempting to masquerade as a democracy, such as Russia, and it states that an event was genocidal, the statement should be considered without credibility. That is not to state that the event was not genocidal. It's just that the agency making the accusation lacks credibility. If the source of the accusation is a country with a government based on the principles of liberal democracy, it is likely that the accusation is credible. Going back to the genocide accusation, the semantic fixation on what's happening is or isn't genocide under the legal framework risks losing sight of that larger picture. Legal experts point out that the charges of genocide should carry no more legal weight than crimes against humanity and war crimes under international law. However, crying genocide carries real weight. And that is why it is vital to understand what is meant by the term genocide and why political accusation cheapens the meaning. Back to the classroom. There are two elements that must be explored. The first, of course, is in part. While many refuse to make genocide an issue of numbers, it is an issue of numbers. In part means a significant part. This was Lemkin's intent. This principle was amply illustrated by the International Criminal Tribunal of the former Yugoslavia in its two rulings regarding genocide in Bosnia. The first deals with, and I will mispronounce this, Srebrenica. With the number and makeup of fatalities, approximately 8,000 men and boys of military age, Muslim Bosnians, rounded up and executed over a few days, combined with the mass rape of Muslim Palestinian women whose offspring would then be Serbians, because that's the nature of the culture, and the forced exile of the remaining Muslim population from that defined area, Srebrenica, led to the Bosnian Serb leadership being guilty of genocide. However, when dealing with the charge of genocide over the entirety of Bosnia, the judges found that the fatality rate, when compared to the population total, to be insufficient to rule it genocide. The second element is intent. Do those making the statements, the same thing Dirk Moses suggested, that suggests committing genocide is on the table, do they have the authority to turn those statements into reality? If it's the leader of a dictatorship, then it's the intent is very likely. If it's the prime minister or president of a country that has a liberal democratic form of government? The answer is likely no. Thank you very much, and I eagerly await your questions.
Thank you, Jack, for your thought-provoking presentation. Now our third presenter is Gaur Yedigarian. Gaur will be presenting on role of genocide education in the fight against direct and public incitement to commit genocide.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be in one panel with all of you, and also thank you to all the organizers for giving us the opportunity to present our research. This is not only about the role of genocide education in its fight against the direct and public incitement to commit genocide. This is about the necessity and urgency for it to have a much bigger role in that sense. First of all, I think we need to remember this illustration, this background, for later on, I will tell. So I'm researching on the direct and public incitement, and as we all know, it is one of the acts of the crime itself, and I'm guided by these powerful quotes in my journey. I really hope that everything is really seen to all of you, but just in case, I will read. So the first is that current special advisor said, no child is born with hate. Hate is taught. Former Deputy Secretary General of the United States, Jan Ellison, said that the fight for uprooting seeds of racism needs to be started in order to stop the genocide, because hatred is vital. And also the previous special advisor said, and which is also in the research of the current president of IAGS, genocide is a process itself. So genocide did not start in the gas chambers in the Shoah case. It started with hate speech. As we all know, the case law for the direct and public incitement is well established. And the incitement to genocide first became a crime under international law in 1946 in the RMT indictment at Nuremberg. So I'm going to talk about the Rwanda case and the Artsakh, known as Nagorno-Karabakh case. And in my research, I'm talking about the certain or specific criteria or characteristics or common ones for states which have which play a big role in their policies towards a certain group, ethnic group, or nation. And these are very important criteria for me to have my arguments and conclusion. So as we all know, again, and it was rightfully and very nicely described by Victor as well, Rwanda is a classical example for the many stages or the acts of the crime, genocide. So incitement to commit genocide has also played a big role in the commitment, and the ICTR cases against Negetse, the editor of the Kangura magazine, is a big example for that. So we have come across this as one of the examples of the issue of the magazine itself, where the editors raised a question about certain weapons that Hutus can use to conquer the Inyensi, as they said, once and for all. It's a specific case in Rwanda because it is one of those exemplary ones that held accountable the perpetrator, or in this case, the person who incited to commit genocide. Now, let's have a look at the quotes of officials of Azerbaijan towards not only specific people of Artsakh, but all the Armenians itself, all the nation, all the ethnic group. And as you can see here, there are several quotes from the officials, and this is the well-known case of Armenian Armenian officer who was in the NATO-led courses in Hungary, and unfortunately he was exed 16 times by an Azerbaijan officer in 2004. And as we see, hours later, days later, the permanent representative of Azerbaijan in the Council of Europe was arguing that, saying, even boasting himself, that he does not advise the Armenians to sleep calmly until the Karabakh conflict is settled, as this incident cannot be ruled out. It was copied also by other representatives, for example, the head of the Azerbaijan delegation to PASE, as you see here. So I argue that these quotes, or this quote, can fall under the CPP-CJ article 3C, so direct and public incitement. And by the way, this quote was not contested by Azerbaijan itself when it was cited by the ECTHR case, as you can see here. And to the right, there is the first source, one of the first sources of that quote. So for me, Azerbaijan is or has become the classical example for contemporary direct and public incitement to commit genocide. And this is state-sponsored hatred against Armenians, which is very alarming. And it's a state policy, and it is pursued on the highest level. As you can see, some researchers argue that direct and public incitement reached its highest point, its culmination, during the 2020 war. There are many quotes by the president. So as you can see, all of them were not possible to be in one picture. Some of them were quoted by the Armenian state in the ICJ case against Azerbaijan, which is which has its preliminary measures, and which are not implemented up until now by the Azerbaijan government or the state. So the ICJ case noted that it is implemented by the higher rank officials. And it was confirmed also by the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance that it's on the highest level. So last year, mainly last year, but starting from the 2022 December and up until September of last year, there was a specifically organized campaign of the government of Azerbaijan, which stripped the territory of Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh, as you can see on the map. And it unfortunately, as a consequence, one person died because of the hunger, because of the situation, conditions created by Azerbaijan by its blockade of 9 months, 9 up to 10 months, and the people were not able to receive the international organization assistance of mere help, for example, food for children. There are many, many examples, as I said, and this is a nice, alarming, at the same time, example by the Parliament of Azerbaijan, which was furious after some international courts and states were arguing that Azerbaijan should stop its blockade. They were arguing that Armenia or the Armenian diaspora has become a cancerous tumor to Europe. So fortunately, there are some people who argue that it was a case, there is a considerable reason to say that genocide was committed against Armenians living in Nagorno-Karabakh. A former ICC prosecutor is one of them. These are 3 examples of the Azerbaijan school textbook, which are currently being used. And as you can see here, there are examples of specific killing of nation, of Armenian nation. For example, on the left, a little girl kills an Armenian soldier, and this is for the 4th grade school children. So the case of Azerbaijan is, if I rephrase the special advisor's quote, that hate is taught by Azerbaijan, and its effects confirmed by ICG, RI, and Lemke Institute, and many others. While many countries and organizations pursue genocide education in school and university, Azerbaijan is literally teaching its young generation to hate all the Armenians, at least for the last 36 years. I had the hard job to choose only one video to showcase this fact, but I see my time could be running out. I can share later on. So teacher here shows children, asks children who they hate. They say Armenians. So for the conclusions, I think, and I argue that as I'm a big genocide education advocate, there is a crucial link between preventing incitement and genocide education, of course, as we all understand, but I argue that genocide education should play a bigger role in the fight for elimination of the grounds based on the early warning signs, which are, for example, the facts of school textbooks by the state of incitement. And I argue that legally binding international mechanisms should be created for monitoring and review of these school textbooks by an independent, for example, by an independent UN-mandated group of experts based on the CRI report as an indicator. State officials who enjoy impunity are most likely to be involved in the incitement to commit genocide game, and educating people is vital. But this necessity to uproot the seeds are very important. So we need to put much more efforts to address the underlying causes of hatred that can lead to genocide. And that's all for now. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I would be pleased to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaur, for shedding lights on role of genocide education in preventing genocide violence. Thank you. I again request our audience, if you have any questions to make to him and for all the presenters, please do that. Now we have the time for question and answering. So I believe that the questions from the audience will be here with us. Some questions already we have got. Let me start with one question to Victor. Maureen Ek to Victor, Ivan. This process will require a lot of buy-in from more than 2/3 of the world nations. So she's basically asking that what is happening in Nigeria, where indigenous peoples are being massacred and applications have been submitted to the ICC, but without success. How will your proposed models then be achieved if the ICC does not seem interested in pursuing investigations? So that is the main part of her question. So if you please join, Victor.
Of course. Thanks, Maureen, for the compliments. And you are very much right in these aspects. I think that a lot of the time, the international system, whether it's the ICC or any other body, isn't responsive enough. So the hope with this is that it's more of like putting public pressure. For example, if I'm honest, I didn't know about this stuff that was happening in Nigeria. I know that there's problems with Boko Haram, but that's the extent of it. And I think that's also at the same time the extent of the average individual, at least here in the United States. So the idea here is to try to form a way of like continually publicizing, putting pressure. I know that it would be the role of the ICC to do it, but I feel like if we were to get an ICC that could be more active and pursue a greater role in the international stage, that could help matters. I'm not sure how I would otherwise convince 2/3 of the world to go on with this, or how I would put forward an ICC that can be more proactive and can address this sort of stuff. But it's more of like the system's a bit of a start, and I feel like we have to have something that's more reactive and able to respond to the changes at hand. Otherwise, it's harder for people to believe in this international legal system and, well, give it any power to begin with. So I hope that's answered your question to the best of I hope that's answered your question. So, yeah.
Thanks, Victor. The question to Gaur, this is related to, given the significant role that media played in the direct and public incitement to commit genocide in cases like Nazi Germany, Rwanda, and Cambodia, how do you think modern digital and social media platforms should be addressed within genocide education to prevent similar incitement in the future?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question, and thank you also to other panelists for their great presentations. So I think this is really disturbing as of now, because the social medias are becoming more and more influential, and sometimes as they are part of other corporations, they are not governed by specific criteria, and they can lead to some cases in the courts, as well as it was in I think in African state. I don't want to say the wrong state. So I think that For example, in the United States, if there are hearings before the Congress, the accountability should be addressed more precisely, and these social media companies should have certain criteria for their policies. Thank you. I hope I really answered the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaur. Now, for Jack Simran, already he has given a reply to that on live, but still I'm just for the audience just trying to say that actually what is the exact question and what is the answer. The thing is, Anna may also raise the question like, what problems does the word intent pose in determining genocide? Should we look at Lemkin's genocide in a more inclusive way or keep it exclusive? That was one. And another, Morinek, she has also asked to Jack in a way that how can genocide not be politicized? What other way do we come to consider it? And also regarding the issue of credibility, she asked, credibility is of the complainant is, I'm sorry, the issue of credibility is of the complainant is problematic. What then makes a complainant credible? So already Jack has written an answer. Jack, should I read that out or you'd like to join?
No, I'll answer it online. The issue regarding adhering to Lemkin, there's a difference regarding the point of law and a point of classroom. Regarding the law, we have the law. So any discussion in a law class or any discussion among lawyers or within the court should follow the law. However, in the classroom, we're discussing ideas. We are trying to look at the big picture. And when we're discussing any aspect of genocide within the classroom, we do have to include Lemkin's thoughts, and Lemkin expanding his idea of genocide from the time he wrote the Axis rule in occupied Europe in 1944 to the time of his death in 1955. In regards to the politics of the genocide accusation, I'm not a political scientist. All my studies are concentrated on just examining genocide, the Holocaust, and many others. The credibility goes to why is the accusation being made? Why is Russia accusing Georgia or accusing Ukraine of committing genocide? This goes back to Hugo Gratis back in the 1600s regarding humanitarian intervention. What is the intent of the country invading another, saying it's humanitarian intervention? If the accusation is made in order to allow the person making the complaint to get some kind of political edge, to get some kind of reason to do something that benefits his own country, that accusation may be far less incredible. However, if it's coming from again, I prefer liberal democracies over dictatorships. If it's coming from a liberal democracy, if it's coming from Sweden, Norway, their political body, it has more of a credible sense. Regardless, neither one is a proof that it's actually a genocide.
Thank you, Jack. I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to our presenters, Victor Ivan, Jack Sigman, Gaur Yedigarian, and Dr. Joyce Aspel for your outstanding contributions. I'd like to thank all of you for your participation and thoughtful questions. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.